last session of the day, the conference actually.
Yeah, last session of the conference, and we are happy that we have a few people in this room. And we are excited to teach you about Azure security best practices from an infrastructure perspective. We also hope that you have had a fantastic conference, even though you guys look a bit tired. So we will try to keep it brief.
All right, I'm Stefan Schörling. I work at Lumagate and Innofactor. I do a lot of cloud stuff and a lot of security stuff.
And I'm Johan Dahlbom. I work for Accenture, Cloud Solutions Architect, Azure, Office 365, EMS, basically. Right, moving on.
It hasn't gone unnoticed for everyone, I guess, around the breaches, security things going on. Each week you see new news pages about companies getting hacked, and it's normal behavior now. You just expect someone to get hacked. We had Uber recently, it just goes on forever. So, and the evolution has been really quick. I mean, back in the days, in the 90s when I started doing computers, you were doing script stuff and found stuff, and then it's really evolved, and now it's really nation state. We see a lot of customers are really getting targeted, attacked. We're after this. A lot of personal data being stolen, healthcare information, and so on. So it's more.
It's another landscape today when it comes to attacks, and I mean, you see headlines about this every week.
Exactly. So I'm not sure if you've seen the page. Information is beautiful. It's a great page to go to. It's visualizing data breaches and other types of data, but this is just data breaches. It's all over. Millions and millions of records are getting stolen every month. So security it needs to be top of mind for everyone. And what we're seeing is that it's actually getting on top of mind for many businesses, and also from a management perspective, that with GDPR coming in and everything with the fines and that comes with it, people are starting to look into security. So, and if we look at the cloud, Gartner has a statement here that 95% of the breaches is going to be the customer's fault. Think about that for a second.
So what you're saying is,
everyone out there, it's your responsibility to configure your things correctly in the cloud.
And what is this number today, you think?
Yeah, that's a good one.
That's a very good one as well.
But coming to this here, with the shared responsibility, Microsoft is going to manage the infrastructure. They're going to take care of some parts. But you're responsible for managing and configuring the parts you can configure. I had a customer, had a developer, they opened up port 1433 to the internet. What can Microsoft do about that? They can inform them, oh, this is not really good. And they were totally compromised and hacked due to the developer opened that port, because they had no insight, they had no one monitoring. So it's really up to the company to take care of what you put up in the cloud.
And understand.
Yeah, and understand. The infrastructure was secure, but someone opened something.
Because it might be relevant. You might be testing out something so Microsoft cannot know, but they can notify you, for sure. So if you look into the overview of the landscape of going into the cloud, what areas do we need to look into, Stefan?
I mean, identity and access is a key point, because the security boundaries are changing. It's not the perimeter firewall in the same sense, because you get access to data through an identity, so it's really about the identity. Identity is both from an administrative perspective, but also from a user perspective, needs to be protected, use multi-factor and so on. Network security is still going to be around, but it's not going to be the core part of it. So.
But if I want to sit there and manage my firewall in my house as I always have done, can't I continue doing that in the cloud?
Sure, you can move your firewalls, but still, you need to modernize and think about security architecture in a new way. So it's still going to be valid, but not in the same sense.
Exactly, and then we have protection, of course. Not only do you need to protect your networks, your identities, you also need to protect your data, because even if you're putting the data in the cloud, you should take all measures you can in order to make sure that the data is encrypted and that you have done everything that you can in order to secure it in case it goes into someone else's hands. So that's also a very important part. And then privacy. What do we mean with data privacy? Can we trust the cloud provider, Stefan?
I mean, it's about trust as well, but it's also about how you build your application, who gets access to what. GDPR, you need to fulfill that, but by the trust of the vendor, I think that more from a compliance and certification perspective, that you demand and you fulfill and they fulfill those requirements. But we need to think about data privacy in a bigger sense when we handle the data, both from an architectural perspective when we build applications, but also from the legal side of it.
And then threat defense, and we will go deeper into that later. But one interesting thing, I was working with a financial services client in December last year, and they were going through a project in order to get their card data environment PCI DSS compliant, and they did this in an on-premises world. And what they realized when we went through how we can do this in a cloud environment, they realized it's actually much easier to get PCI DSS compliant in the cloud, because Microsoft has a lot of checklists that do a lot of work that you don't for you. Instead of you having to go through all these checklists, they have done a lot of work for you. So you get a lot of things prepared. So that is actually one real world experience for me, where that was actually easier for them to get compliant moving to the cloud. Then I don't say it's easy to get PCI DSS compliant or any of the other certifications, but you get a lot of help on your way. For sure.
Then in general, when working with security, most of you are probably familiar with the NIST security framework, and it's a cyclic process where we start with identify. We need to know what our critical assets is, what the threats are, and so on. Then we move on to the protect phase, where we actually protect our systems and configure them and make sure we protect about what we know. Then the next step is the detection part. We need to detect if someone actually is trying to get in or someone has breached our company. So it's the detect capabilities we need to get to see if someone is doing anything. And when we have detected it, we need to have respond capabilities to respond to what's going on. And when we have responded, we need to recover to a normal state again. In this session, we're going to focus on the protect and detect phases when it comes to the Azure parts.
Yeah, right. And where do we start? Administration and governance. I mean, if we are starting up an Azure subscription, it's fairly easy, and many organizations do that every day. But when you're starting this up in a larger organization, you need to start building your house, and you need to start to build your structure. If you want to make it secure, if you want to be in control of your environment. And in those cases, it's very important to start. First of all, you need to have an enterprise agreement or an agreement with Microsoft, so you are in control of your subscriptions. I have seen a lot of organizations, large enterprise organizations, where departments have bought their own Azure subscriptions via credit cards. So they had subscriptions scattered across the globe without even knowing. So merging those together can be a mess. Then you need to look into the classic stuff, subscriptions. And to the right, naming standards, naming conventions. And I will show you in our environment, it's not beautiful. You need to make sure that you are in control of all those things from the beginning, for sure. And then you need to move on and basically build all the policies, audits, and the automation you need. And that's basically what we will go through during this session. So Stefan, this is an example on how it might look in a larger organization.
Yeah, exactly. We have the enterprise first, and then we can define and delegate down further if it's a large environment to different departments, and then we move it down to the account owners. And then we have the subscription level, and at the bottom we have resource groups. So this is the different granularities we can have to delegate subscriptions and access to these. And this will, of course, vary depending on the requirements. We may skip some steps and just have one streamlined line, but this is something you have to work with, or you can work with when delegating access to it. So there's happened quite a lot on that. So,
exactly.
But basically, it's when we come down to the nitty-gritty, it's around subscriptions and resource group. But from a large corporation perspective, we can even separate the subscriptions in different accounts.
Exactly, if it's a really large organization, but this is an enterprise organization. And Another important thing, now they released a new feature for a while ago, which makes it possible to actually group subscriptions, something called management groups. And then another thing, from a billing perspective, it is very important to tag your resources so you can get your billing sorted if you want to put the billing out to departments and so on. So that's also something that you need to enforce via policies and so on.
Because cost is really part of the governance as well.
Yeah.
We need to know what's being consumed, who's consuming what, where can we adjust and make more efficient solutions. So.
Exactly. And then we come into how can we control this, Stefan?
So basically when we built this structure and we can set up some certain policies we can use. Let's say we only allow our data to be stored in Europe. So then we can do a policy that we can apply to subscription, management groups or so, that says you're only allowed to deploy resources to European data centers, for example. So if someone tries to deploy something to Australia or US, they will be declined to do that deployment. So from a central governance perspective, we can apply these policies, which will apply to the developers or the other people who are doing work in the subscriptions, or resource groups for that matter. So they will be declined there. So we need to set up some certain parameters around that.
Yeah, another common thing I have come across before is the setting up policies for virtual machines, for example. So you can't use the highest tier of virtual machines that can cost quite a lot in certain subscriptions or certain resource groups.
Exactly, and you can apply naming conventions and prefixes that you need to have. So.
Exactly. So let's delve into the portal and see if we can find that. All right. So as you can see here, I have something called policies down at the very bottom left here. And I will just move that up a little bit. There we have policies. And this was a new thing for you.
Yeah.
You can move things in the menu up.
I've never done that.
Customize the menu. That's cool.
I do everything with partial, you know. So.
Exactly. Exactly. And then what I actually can do here is to go in and assign a policy. So let's go in and look into what policies I have. What were we looking for? It was something with location, right?
Yeah, location. So there are some pre-built policies that are Microsoft have published, but you can also
exactly. So
build
you
your
can see
own
here
components. So.
it says allow locations. This policy enables you to restrict the locations your organization can specify when deploying resources. Exactly what we want to do. And we select that. And allowed locations in our case then would be West Europe, maybe?
West Europe, North Europe, maybe?
North Europe. Okay, and maybe UK in the future, who knows? There we go. And then we will apply that to the entire subscription. And as you can see, you can apply it to an entire subscription, then you can actually exclude certain parts as well. For example, if you don't want it to be applied to a dev resource group or something like that, you can do that as well. There we go. And then we can assign it.
So now we've assigned this policy to this subscription, and if there's someone trying to deploy a resource in another region, it's going to fail for them. So that is a good thing, so we can control somehow, because we come into customers and they have resources everywhere. So this is a good thing if you want to control which data center we should use. So.
Exactly.
And other parameters, of course, like naming and so on.
Yes. And then, I cannot stress this enough. I had a session, we had a session today regarding Office 365 security, and a lot of the things that are applicable to Office 365 are of course applicable to Azure as well. So role-based access control, basically using the principle of least privilege, as we always have done, is something that is important in the cloud world as well. You don't want to give them too much permissions. And then, if you have access to sensitive information, sensitive infrastructure, basically the keys to the kingdom, you have to have multi-factor authentication. That should be a requirement. And I would argue that it should even be a requirement in your internal corporate network in many cases. And then we will show you a little bit of this later. There is a possibility to actually elevate permissions just in time as well with something called privileged identity management, which basically allows you to get permissions to a certain resource in Azure just in time. So you can get it logged in a better way as well. Right.
And then we have the concept of privileged access workstations. It's Anyone using privileged access workstation today when you do administration, or you do it from your normal computer where you surf on exciting sites and stuff? Not many have started with this, but we've seen some high security companies usually have this, where you have dedicated machines where you do administration from. Microsoft has a concept around it, a really good article, where you run all your administration from a dedicated machine, which is secured both from a Windows perspective with credential guard and everything like that. And you do the administration from that machine instead of your normal PC. So it's kind of a jump station perspective, but it's where you do everything from, so you don't get all the malware.
So you're not allowed to do the bad stuff on that machine, basically?
No, exactly. And then you can control the conditional access, that administration and things should be done from this IP range or this machine. So then we can just control that admins are not logging in from their home computers, and their token is still there, and they get something, and then they lose control of it. So even if you use MFA, you have the session tokens that your session is valid and so on. So it's important to clear that out.
Absolutely. And then we go into the just-in-time access discussion, and they have two different features in Azure called just-in-time access. One feature that relates to virtual machines and network access, and one that relates to your identity, basically the possibility to elevate to another role just-in-time. And I will just go in and show you how that works. Okay, first, let's see if I have some access in my tenant here. There we go. And for the networking parts, we have, as you can see here, something called just-in-time VM access. And what that means is basically that we can assign, we can open firewall ports just in time to certain resources when we need it. And I will show you why this is not really a feature that is usable for most organizations right today. But as you can see here, I have a virtual machine here called AZSec demo. And what I can do here is basically say request access. And what that will do then, depending on the choices I make here in my request, is basically open up, for example, the RDP port from my IP. And what is my IP in this specific case?
Yeah, it's the IP you're coming from, the endpoint, so which one you're natted behind or whatever it could be. So the challenge here is if this would mean that this is the IP I'm coming from, it would open up to the external port, and you would not really want your VM access on the internet. Typically you have a hybrid connection with VPN or something, but you can use the same APIs if you want to do it in another portal where you build it yourself and use PowerShell in the background to do the automation about this. But in this case, like Johan is mentioning, it's going to use your IP, which is, yeah. Yeah,
exactly. So if you require that kind of control, you can build it yourself as of now if you want to open it up from your internal addresses. But still, it's a good improvement if you have environments that are open to the internet, like cloud-borne environments, depending on what requirements you have. And then we have the other concept, Azure AD Privileged Identity Management, and I will just look into that briefly. And I'm using another tenant here.
Yeah, it's really bright.
It is really bright. Let me change it. There we go. Feels better? Let's see if I can go in. And basically what this allows me to do is, if I have created certain roles in Azure, I have the possibility to elevate to that role, or basically I can go into a role, I can, let's see, contributor, and then I can, for example, contributor to a subscription from that level says that, okay, if you want to have this role, you need to elevate first so we can get it logged, and then we will.
So the principle here is that your account is not a member of those group all the time, and when you need administration access for this role,
exactly,
you will elevate and get granted for that period you need it. And if your account gets compromised, you're not part of those roles at that time.
Exactly. So the first setting here says that You are eligible for a maximum amount of 3 months, and then you can have that role for 8 hours, or 3 hours, or what you feel is relevant. But 8 hours is a good work day, so probably okay. And then you have the, as I usually call it, the consultant setting, where you can set and add a person to a role when it expires after 1 month. So basically, if you have a consultant, short-term consultant, you can add that person to that role, and it will expire after a month. So also a pretty good option depending on what you are asking for.
Yeah, and that's really good for consultant, because I'm a consultant and I have a lot of access to different tenants with my Microsoft account, and even if I'm not working with a customer, it's still laying around there in all these customers. So start using this if you're using consultants.
The only caveat is that it requires Azure AD Premium P2.
Yeah,
but still it's worth it compared to getting breached. Yes.
It is.
Okay, moving on.
All right, this is about defense in depth. Those of you who attended our previous session, it's all about layered security. You can't just have one feature. You need to have several layers, the old onion principle. So where you have different layers. We have the DMZ in this case, where we have network security groups, which is ACLs protecting the different layers. Or you could use micro-segmentation or whatever you want to use there. So in this case, we have the public internet. We have a web application firewall, which is a reverse proxy checking different web traffic, so we don't get exposed to known web attacks. And then we have a firewall rule. Then we have a load balancer that can split it out to several web servers. And there we also have an ACL rule. And then we have the app service environment and so on. So we build this in different layers, like a segmentation. So it's nothing different from the on-prem thinking, but not everyone got to this principle when they started building their on-prem.
And of course, we have the backend with all the backend services, logging, analytics, and that kind of stuff that is also important to get in control of your environment.
Exactly.
Okay, so here we have an example, and I think this is a PCI DSS blueprint, actually.
Exactly. Microsoft has a lot of references around architecture for different compliance frameworks. This is one we took from the PCI framework, where this is a PCI certified environment, how we would build it in Azure as a reference architecture. So we have different resource groups, we have different VNets, we have different subnets, and we have network security groups in between. So it's just for reference to know about. And it's really hard to see down there, but we have some different supporting services like Key Vault. Key Vault is a great service where you can store credentials. So instead of developers putting in credentials in the code, you store the credentials in the Key Vault, and you call on those credentials from the Key Vault.
Yeah, and there was actually a new feature there, right? If you are deploying code from GitHub.
Exactly. So a lot of this is about infrastructure as code. You define a lot of it in GitHub, and you have this ARM template, and we deploy it. Recently, Microsoft put in that it's actually using a cred scan, so it's scanning all these GitHub repositories where you deploy from for credentials. If they find credentials in these GitHub repos, they're actually going to contact the subscription owner. And talking about that, setting a subscription owner is really important on your subscription, because those persons or that role, which we recommend to have a role mailbox, you will get those notifications if they find things like that. So it's done automatically, so nothing you need
Okay, and what's a web application firewall? What's that good for?
It's for protecting against web attacks, SQL injections, cross-site scriptings, and so on. This has been around for a very long time, but we have this available in Azure as well. Microsoft have their one, but you can also use third-party web application firewalls like F5 or whatever you want to use to protect your web workloads. So.
Yeah, exactly. But everyone is writing perfect code anyway, so I'm not sure if it's needed.
Yeah, everyone here at least, so that's should be good
exactly. So let's have a look into our little web application firewall.
Sure. So in this case, we have a web instance which we have exposed on the internet, but that wasn't really a good idea because...
No, exactly. This is a really insecure website. This is actually something that you can download. This is OWASP Use Shop, which is basically the world's most insecure web shop.
Yeah.
So if you want to test security features built into the web application firewall, this is an excellent web shop to deploy.
Exactly. We spun this up the other day, and then we've seen a lot of attacks on it. So we actually
not even initiated. Exactly. It has a scoreboard here, so we can see when it has been breached and what different vulnerabilities. Ah, there's a new one. What vulnerabilities that have been hacked on this site. So this, if you like to try out things like this, check it out. It's security policies.
So policies is about what do we want to monitor, what do we want to control, or what do we want to see. So we have like security updates, if storage accounts are encrypted, do we check for web application firewalls and so on. So we can turn this on and off.
Yes, exactly. And based on this, you can actually turn off the Christmas tree lights. If you want to, but I recommend to keep it on the default, leaving everything on, but depending on the services you're using, you might want to turn some of the things off. Right. Okay. And then we can also add other solutions into this. So if you go back to the overview, we have something called security solutions here. And in our case, we have 2 different security solutions added into this that will feed information into Security Center as well. So one of them is the web application firewall. So basically, if someone tries to hack our web pages or websites, it will actually feed information into Security Center as well. So we get the single pane of glass view of our security infrastructure in Azure. And the other one is identity protection. The service that we can use basically to evaluate sessions as we sign in and detect risky sessions and add multi-factor authentication and so on.
There's a few more available there, and this is constantly, Microsoft is adding new features there, so it's something you should monitor and look into what's new there.
Exactly, exactly. And then if we go into prevention here, we have 4 different parts. First of all, so this is basically what is being monitored right now from an Azure services perspective. So compute, networking, storage, and applications. And what we should look into here is, first of all, you see I have 5 red parts here, which is, red is usually bad. And you can see that I have a couple of issues with these machines. And rather than going in here to get the consolidated view on the different things and the different actions that you need to do, you should go into the recommendations instead. And then you can see how your environment looks like and the different recommendations that Microsoft have for your environment. So first of all, one thing that might be good to look into, disk encryption. We discussed this before. Should we apply disk encryption to all our machines? That might be a good idea. That is a recommendation. And it requires key vault, but it will help you sleep a bit better during the night. And restrict access through internet-facing endpoint. That is also a very good idea, depending on the workload that you're actually exposing. But in this case, it's RDP. But more important...
It gives you really good insights and something to monitor. Of course, it's not 100% bulletproof, but
no, exactly. But it gives you an overview on the easy things that you can change in order to improve security in your environment. And this is actually something that is very important. Security contact details.
So if you use the paid version, it does more monitoring on the network. So if they find like you have a botnet, your machines are peering and talking to other machines, this is the person they will contact if Microsoft finds something in their monitoring. Because they monitor the infrastructure, they will see anomalies and find actions to take on. And this is the person they're going to contact. So.
And this is also a new feature that was added quite recently. Security configuration on individual VMs, where they actually use best practices in regards to security policies on the VMs that you can add. So this is recommendations that you normally would add by group policy or something.
Yeah, this is basically the security baselines.
Yeah.
So it's monitoring for those.
But, hands, very good. Very good. Okay, and then if we go back into the overview, we can look into the different events that we have, right?
Yes, so we have 5,500 events here. So it's pulling in the event logs from the machines through this monitoring agent into a storage space where it's monitored and gathered.
Exactly, and let's see what type of events we have. Accounts failed to log on. Oh, it has actually increased since we looked into this.
Yeah, someone is brute forcing our VMs basically.
Yes.
How do you look at that normally? This is really good view. So.
Exactly, so let's see if we can get a summarized view on this.
Dum, da, da, dum.
Okay, let's see. So we have someone, other user, these two are actually me. I have tried to brute force ourselves. And then we have administrator, 203 tries.
That was 20 this morning, I think.
Yeah, it was 20 this morning. So So things are happening quickly if you expose your machines externally. So this is also, and the good thing here, you can actually attach alerts to these as well if you want to take action on it, but we have other things for that as well. So this is just an example on the type of events that you get in here. And an event, then, if it gets critical, can be raised as an incident, right?
Yeah, it's a security alert at least. So.
Yeah, a security alert.
So first it becomes a security alert, and if Microsoft correlates that you have several security alerts that could correlate to one thing, that would create an incident. In this case, we don't have any incidents here, but we can go in and look at these security alerts.
Yes, exactly. And these are our security alerts, and if we delve in a bit to these, we have most of them are related to our web application firewall, when we and someone else have tried to hack our website. And then we have another one, sign in from an anonymous IP address. And that's actually...
Scroll up, I don't think they can see it.
They can't see it, okay. Let's see if I can do it like this, and then do it like that.
So this comes from the identity protection.
Yeah, so this is the identity protection, and this is the web application firewall, basically. So if we go into the sign in from anonymous IP address here, let's see what has happened in this specific case, okay? This was yesterday, and this was actually me signing into this account from a Tor browser, which can be suspicious in some cases. And what I can do then, to dive in a bit deeper into this, is to click on Continue Investigation, which will give me an overview on the events that has occurred. And this does not look as cool as it does if you, for example, have a breach into a VM where they have done some lateral movement and stuff.
Exactly, where they correlated all these events and put the chain together. And this is what we're visualizing in this. So we can actually, when we do the investigation, we can see what assets were involved, what IP addresses, which account. So we easily can see the correlation, how they tie together. So if we have several machines they've compromised, we will see the whole chain, and we can dig through and we'll see the timeline and work on that. Another thing they're working on here is out to the right.
Yes, exactly.
Is playbooks, so you can do an orchestrated workflow of actions you want to take when these incidents happen. Today they're not that really rich, but that's something they're developing, so you can actually do flows to take actions. Let's disable this account or block this firewall, and how do we want to
exactly, and it's using Azure Logic apps in the back end, so it's codeless basically, but you can attach it to PowerShell scripts or whatever you want. Right, so this was a bit of an overview of Azure Security Center. I think we should move on to the next part, which is even more important, I think. And it's also related. Logging, Stefan.
Yeah, logging. Logging of data is something that you need to think of. How long do you need to save the logs? Because the logs are not saved that long in Azure by default. It's like 30 to 90 days, depending on what items we're talking about. Or we're talking about Azure AD auditing logs, for example. That's 30 days. Probably the mean time before you detect a breach today is way longer. It's something 200 days, or depending on who you look stating it, but it's very long time. Then you need to have the logs available. So best practice is actually to gather these logs, send them up to a log repository, and you have different options. So
exactly. And I mean, by default, you have something called Azure Monitor, and that is the basic service that Microsoft provides in order to give you a central place for logging. But then there are other solutions, such as Log Analytics, that Security Center are using, and you can actually ship your logs to Log Analytics to give you a better search engine and better possibilities to take action based on the logs that you get. And then, if you are a developer and you are developing applications, you can also use something called Application Insights, which will give you insights into the code in the application, so you can actually troubleshoot them as you go, which is kind of cool. And then you have the Network Watcher, which is kind of new.
It's kind of new. It has some different features. You can do packet captures from VMs. If you need to record network traffic, you can do that for troubleshooting. You can gather all the data from the different things there. But the thing we're seeing most of the customers do when they have a critical mess is that they connect it to a third-party log source. If they use a CM system, they connect it to their QRadar or their Splunk or whatever log system they have. So they actually ship the logs there.
Because you don't only have the logs in Azure to look into in most cases. You have to store them in a central place, which makes sense for you. If you're a cloud-native organization, the cloud-only options might make sense, but in most cases that I have seen with my customers, we use something else in general. And
because you already have an investment on-prem and you want to use the same system instead of having two locations to look into. So that's typically...
Exactly.
But if you haven't started, you can always start with log analytics from Microsoft in the OMS suite for a start and see how far you get on that. There's also some integration to Power BI, so like the network security groups we showed earlier, which is basically an ACL where you control source and destination and port. If you want to visualize that, you can do that through the logs we showed earlier, but you can also connect the Power BI dashboard to visualize how traffic is flowing and analyze the number of events you have on those rules. So.
And also like CXO dashboard or a management dashboard for the security events in your subscription. So.
Exactly.
And most of Microsoft services can be integrated with Power BI nowadays.
Of course.
All right. What about pen testing? And I got this question from, I actually got a statement from a customer last week. Microsoft told me that if I want to try this out on my own, and if I want to pen test my own environment, they told me that I have to call them first. That is not true anymore.
No, they changed that policy because first they said you're not allowed to do any pen test on any resources you're running. You're not allowed to attack our infrastructure. So basically they've changed that statement. So if you want to do pen test and test your infrastructure out, you're now allowed to do that. They're even encouraging it.
Yeah.
So if you find something, report it because they want to be secure, they want to know all of this. So
yeah, but you are not allowed to attack other environments, of course.
Not other customers, of course.
No, exactly. And another thing that they recently released is a really, really good documentation on Azure security best practices and patterns. And you find it on that specific link down there. So if you're looking into this and you want to shape up your environment from a security perspective, I highly recommend you to look into that article. Contains a lot of good information.
And a lot of it ties back to the NIST framework. If some of you are already working with the NIST guidelines, it really ties back to that, but it's connected to how Azure is built and what features you have in Azure, so you can get started really quick. So it's both as operational guides as technical implementation guides.
Yes. And other resources?
Of course, we have the bug bounty program for those of you who are hacking. You can always send in bug bounties to get cache, so look at what you can get there.
And then Trust Center, if you're starting to use Azure, you want to get compliant, you want to look into all these documents, send them into your compliance organization, that's where you start, usually. And then Cloud Security Alliance.
If you're working with cloud technologies, Cloud Security Alliance is a framework that's actually applying to any cloud providers. It's a really good framework with a lot of requirements and specifications on how you should define and configure that. So that's a really great resource if you haven't looked into it. So.
And of course there are more resources than this, but...
Yeah, but this is the highlight.
The basic stuff, exactly. All right.
So with that, we want to thank you for attending here the last session and hope you have learned some new stuff.
Thank you.